So you, when y'all went on those trips and you finally sensed God saying, let's go, or at least let you see, you were going there and you were just working. You were using all that God had led you through in your education and preparation just to be an orthopedic surgeon. You were utilizing that, and much of that God prepared you before you're even a believer, and God had drawn the line. You were going as a wife that was at a place where I'm going to support my husband in this, and then all of a sudden while he's working, doing what he's doing, you're seeing the need. And is that really what gripped your heart?
Yeah, I think it was the first time in my life that God extended what I've come to name one of the holiest invitations He gives to us as believers, which is to enter into another person's suffering. And so it was the first time that I really stepped out of my comfort zone and entered into another person's suffering without the idea that I could solve it. And so to sit in a home with a grandmother who's caring for 9 to 10 grandchildren, and when we say home, I mean a one-bedroom, not one bedroom, a one-room building that's made of mud, manure, and sticks. It has a dirt floor. Oftentimes the walls are made of cardboard or burlap potato sacks. They don't know where their next meal comes from. They don't have clean water. They don't have running water. The kids don't go to school. It was more than I could take in. It was really more than I could take in. And I didn't have an answer for it. Bob's an orthopedic surgeon. I was a math teacher. We were very much about identify the problem, figure out how to solve it, circle it up, and move on to the next problem. And here we encountered problems that I could never have even before imagined, much less determine a solution for them. And so going to see and watching my own children enter into people's sufferings. And children are amazing. They don't run from it. They don't run from someone else who's suffering. They actually run to it. And to watch my daughter Emily and my son Will sit beside children who are very, very sick, play with kids who had wounds or didn't speak the same language, and just to see them in this environment and to see them flourish in it. I couldn't, after two trips, it was a total of 3 months on those 2 trips, I couldn't shake that the Lord was saying, now what's your response to this? Because you can't see this, you can't enter into this and remain the same. And I think, looking back on it, that one of the things I feared so much about going on a short-term mission trip was that I would have to make a response. And so my response was vague because I didn't know the answer. It was simply what Bob said. I think that the Lord wants us to commit that somehow we'll be involved in orphan care. And at that point in time, I never dreamt it meant moving to Kenya. I still thought it meant helping from afar. But that was not the plan that God had. And I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful now that God went to the extremes He did, the lengths He did to get our family to go to Kenya the first time. I'm so thankful for the people I've met, the opportunities I got to be involved in, and how He has now taken us to Kenya to live there permanently. I can't imagine what I'd be doing otherwise.
Wow. Now, so you've got a practice at this point. You've still got your orthopedic practice. You've seen this piece of land that doesn't look like much. It's got a well in it. And you were thinking it's not a very good property. Now, how do we get from there to Naomi's village? 45 kids, looking at potentially having as many as 100, I think, at some point. An academy that the steps go on. So, kind of give us a quick scenario of how you went from there to where we are today.
Yeah, I wish it was quick. I'll do the best I can. I always, as a surgeon, had problems that I could fix. Start here, end here, and there was a quick, easy way to navigate that. And I found that this one was a big problem. You know, there were so many orphans there, 2.4 million in Kenya, and it seemed like this dead patch of land down there was going to be impossible to do anything with. And again, we're being called over there for me to do orthopedic surgery, it seemed like, and that's what we moved there to do. So I closed my practice, and we joined on with Cure International, and we went there for me to do that, ostensibly. And Julie was going to teach school at the Mission Kids School on the station, and so she took a job full-time doing that, and we raised our initial, about $25,000, had a fundraising event for the children's home as sort of a side project, okay? And we moved over there, and when we got there, I started working full-time as an orthopedic surgeon. She was teaching, and we bought the land, and we put it under the heading of Naomi's Village, and we formed a board, and we started trying to decide what to do. And we eventually found an architect, and he drew up some architectural plans saying, you really can't do anything with that two-room house. If you're going to do anything at all, you probably have to build a bigger structure. And after talking, we realized that the Lord was calling us to help total orphans and not have a day center there, but to bring in kids that were destitute, that had the worst problems. Both parents had died. Because if you start delving into all the single parent households there, you would never be able to solve that problem. So we realized that the neediest children were the ones that God was calling us to help. And so as we looked at that and realized how many children there were, we knew we needed to build a big enough home to accommodate as many children as possible. And both of us felt a call to do that for 100 children. So now we're talking about a big children's home that maybe houses 100 children. That's about 10,000 square feet. And we only had $25,000. So, and again, I'm practicing orthopedics full-time up the hill, and she's teaching school. And we needed a builder, and we needed money, and this big problem, you know. So we were praying, and the Lord brought us a builder from Melissa, Texas, and money started to gradually trickle in. And in the process, I felt like God was calling me to scale back how much I was practicing orthopedics. She finished her time teaching for 2 years, and things started to fall into place. And we broke ground in November 2009. And what then ensued was a long, difficult process of building in a rural area. We had no running water, we had no electricity, we had to use a generator, a single-phase generator, and we had to figure out how to build in an area where there is no Home Depot or Lowe's to get your supplies from. And all of the stones that it took to build that building had to be made by hand on site into stones that could build walls. Every window had to be made from stock metal. Everything was difficult, but the 10,000 square foot building got built, and it took about a total of 18 months. And in January of 2011, we started bringing in kids while the finish work was still going on. And I'm going to let Julie, again, she can tell the heart story of how we found our first kid, but that's sort of how Naomi's Village came to be, at least.
Okay. Tell us about that first child.
Okay, so in January 2011, we were ready to open our doors and bring in children. If you go backwards a couple of months, in November of 2010, Bob and I honestly had had enough of building. It was grinding and exhausting. And we felt this just holy urgency, honestly, in our hearts of, we've got to have this building ready by January. So in January, early January 2011, we began identifying on paper the first children that we would bring into the home. We had identified 13 children that once the home was ready, we would go get. They would be our first ones that we would bring into Naomi's Village. I thought we should just identify 10 at the very beginning because we didn't know what we were doing. So now we're already at 13. So I'm having a meeting one day with our social worker and my assistant administrator, and we're saying, okay, these are the kids we're going to go get. When can we go get them? What needs to happen at the building still before we're ready to pick the kids? And by the way, no more kids for right now because we've already got more than we should have taken in, or that we should have identified to bring in. At that moment, my assistant administrator, who's Kenyan, she looks out the window and she says, oh, here comes a pastor who actually was in my wedding, and I know he's come from far off, so I need to go visit with him. And I said, that's fine, but if he wants to talk about bringing a child in, tell him not now, but later. So she goes, visits, and she comes back after about 20 minutes, and her eyes are just full of tears, wide open. She has this look on her face of shock. So I say, Esther, you know, what's going on? She said, let me tell you the story of this child. Well, in November 2010, at the same time we're feeling this urgency to complete the building, there was a young boy, 3 years old, named Joshua, who lived about 45 minutes from Naomi's village. His father, he was in his early 30s, came home drunk one night. The mother to Joshua was in her late 20s. She was 8 months pregnant. She had a 7-year-old son and a 1-year-old son. So there were three boys in the family. The father came home drunk. A fight ensued. Nobody knows what happened and what caused the fight. But the mother and the father began arguing, and he pulled a big machete out, pushed the wife down on this wood table that's in this little small home, and killed her. Joshua, who was 3 at the time, managed to escape out of the house through a little hole that was on the side of the wall. But the 7-year-old was presumably too big to get out, and the 1-year-old was a baby. He couldn't manage that. So the father, after he killed the 8-month pregnant mom, killed the 7-year-old boy the same way, and the 1-year-old baby the same way. And then the dad, climbed up on the table and hung himself. So Joshua is out in the dark night. There's no electricity anywhere, and so it's very, very dark and cold. When things settle in the house, he comes back in. He's 3 years old, and he sees his dad from the rafters swinging back and forth. And so he thinks his dad is just swinging. So he talks to his dad for a while to see if he'll come down, and he won't. And so Joshua, tired, cold, alone, and confused, curls up next to his mother and tries to sleep for the rest of the night. He comes out when the sun comes up and has blood on him now. And after telling the neighbors enough times, and the neighbors realizing they haven't seen anyone from the family, they go back with Joshua to find this horrific scene. And so Joshua, for the next couple of months, just bounced from home to home of relatives, because when you're poor, another mouth to feed is a huge deal. And sadly, in African culture, there's a mindset that Joshua, because of what's happened in his family, is now cursed. And so Joshua would carry forward this curse into another family. We see it as Joshua was protected and blessed. And Joshua means the Lord saves. And so the Lord saved Joshua. And he was our first child that we brought in, because this pastor who had made his way on foot from 45 minutes away, 45 minutes by car, and showed up at just that moment when I'm saying, no more children. This pastor had taken on Joshua's cause. He wanted to find him a good home. He had all of his paperwork that the government requires. He had it all ready. And so on January 27th, 2011, we got in the car, and we were nervous and excited, and we drove to go get Joshua, and we found Joshua. He had a little suitcase packed and a little denim suit on, and we brought him home to Naomi's village, and he was our first child that came home.
And I'm sure that many of the kids have very similar stories, maybe not quite that graphic, but certainly similar situations of being totally destitute, total orphans. So God has begun to build this, and it's growing.